Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies, dual CCIE and owner and principal, here to have a brief discussion about FMC or SMC, depending on who you ask, HA. So let's start on the whiteboard here and let's discuss it. So again, FMC slash SMC HA, depending on who you ask, because it's Firepower Management Center or Secure Management Center, depending on who you ask. SMC is the actual new flavor of the month from Cisco, so we're just going to go with SMC. So just like in the FTD world, there's HA, there's active standby, and there's clustering, and then there's inter-chassis clustering or intra-chassis clustering, but that's for the 4,000 series and 9,000 series of the FTDs, and those are the big beefy ones that have multi-instance and stuff like that, your CSP files and all that good stuff. But we're going to strictly talk about HA on the FMC or SMC. So first off, why would you do that? So you're going to do HA on the FMC or SMC because you want to make sure you have management function at all times. Now, the FTDs will work without the FMC in the data plane. But as far as trying to make changes, you can't do that. You need to make sure that you have that management function there. The sucky part about that as well, if you have to restore from a backup, you're going to be down from a management standpoint until that comes back up. The purpose of HA in the management center is to, if one goes down, you're still able to make management changes because you're going to have two tunnels, one to the primary and one to the secondary. So let's go and see how that looks like from an architectural standpoint. So normally what people will do is they'll have two data centers, right? Data center 1, data center 2. That's an ugly square. And then they will have FMC, SMC1, FMC, SMC2, and then they'll either have some type of layer 2 DCI, or they're doing something like MPBGP EVPN multi-site, which is basically extending layer 2 across the data centers there. But let's make it simple and just say this is just a L2 DCI, and you have L2 reachability here. So these two boxes are in the same subnet, just stretched over. So what's going to basically happen, and you do not need to do that in order to do this. You can do FMC HA at a layer 3 level. So they can be in different subnets. All you need is the L3 reachability. But we're just going to do simple layer 2. So what's going to happen is, let's draw some FTDs out here. 1, 2, 3. Now there is a caveat on here that you need to watch out that I'm going to mention. So how the FTD and FMC communicate when you want to manage it through the FMC or FCM or SCM, if you want to call it that, it's going to do a tunnel, a source fire tunnel. That's basically what an FS tunnel is on TCP 8305. So that's the port number that's it's gonna do it on. Almost messed up. It said 8905, but it's 8305, and it's TCP, not UDP. When you have an HA, what's going to happen is, and you always do HA first, right? So these two boxes are going to sync their databases. Now, just like in all other HA configurations, these boxes must be the same. It has to be the same version of code. Has to, if it's physical, should be the same box. You don't want to do a beefy FMC with a smaller FMC. Doesn't make any sense, right? Make sure that they're the same from a hardware perspective or virtual perspective and the same code. If they're not the same code, this will not work. So what they're going to do is they're going to sync their databases up. You're going to do that first. Once they're in HA, all right? And the process of doing this is just, it's real easy to do this. It just may not be your use case. But once these are synced in HA, now you want to attach the FTDs. Now, the next logical question is, well, what if I have a FMC or SMC set up currently, and I want to add another box in for HA. You could technically do that. Now, the issue with this is what's going to end up happening is later on in the next interval between the management center and the FTD, it will send out, hey, there's another box you need to sync with. And then the HA will work. Well, let's say you're starting from scratch. What you're going to do is once this is set up, you're going to configure the manager on each one of these. And you can only configure one. All right, you're going to configure the manager on each one of these. Now, what that is going to do, it will reach out to your primary FMC or SMC. Now, this is, remember, TCP 8305. So if you got anything in the middle in line, if you're blocking this port, that's why your management isn't working. Now, if you set it up the way I normally set up, what's going to happen is this SMC or FMC, let's just stick with that, is going to reach back out to the FTDs and they're going to start syncing configurations. So this SF tunnel is going to start. But the key thing here, and I'm not going to talk about the difference between, management and event versus separate management and event interfaces. We can talk about that in another topic. This is strictly talking about HA. What's going to happen is the FMC, the primary one, is going to reach back out to each one of these and will notify them that, hey, I want you to establish a tunnel with me, but I also have this FMC down at the bottom that I'm doing HA with that I need you to form another tunnel to. So what ends up happening is each one of these, once they get that message, will have a tunnel, SF tunnel, to the secondary. Now, they will have the tunnel, but from a management perspective, all the management functionality, even the console changes on the secondary FMC, all the stuff that you used to be able to, that you can do on your primary, you'll have like 3 options, really. You'll get to see what devices are synced, and I think a couple other options, but they're like view options. You can't really do anything until that box becomes the primary. But between these 2 devices, they will have their individual SF tunnels. Now, what can end up happening, and you'll see this warning when you do this, when you connect to the first FMC, or when the first time you connect the FTDs to the primary FMC, you will see a warning message saying out of sync for the secondary FMC, which is fine because it hasn't got the message to establish another tunnel to the secondary FMC. So it does take some time for this to actually sync 100% correct. Now, when you do, there's a certain command in the FTD that if you wanted to run it and see the tunnels, it would be SF tunnel status. SF tunnel status. And if you run that on each of these machines or each of these FTDs, you will see the SF tunnels for both boxes. When you first start traditionally, you'll see 1. And then once it syncs up or gets the message from the primary that, hey, there's another secondary as well, you'll see 2, right? Now, from an encryption standpoint, it is like I believe it's an AES GCM encryption model so that the integrity is already in there so you don't have to worry about your integrity algorithms and stuff like that. I think I talked about that before in one of my FTD videos. But people usually do this because they want to make sure they have redundancy at the management level, especially if you're a company that makes changes, frequently. You don't want a situation where your FMC goes down for some odd reason, whatever it is, and you can't make changes anymore, right? Because then you're pretty much down from an administrative standpoint, from a management standpoint, but not from a data plane standpoint. So what are some of the things you got to worry about when doing this? Well, two really. The first one is upgrades. When you do an upgrade on a HA-enabled FMC pair, there's a certain procedure that you have to do to make sure you upgrade it correctly. Because if you don't upgrade it correctly and you don't, you have to pause the synchronization in order for that to go. If you do not pause the synchronization, what ends up happening is the upgrade can cause all kind of issues. So you want to avoid that type of issue by pausing the synchronization and doing the upgrade in a certain order and then reestablishing the peer connection between the two. The other issue that you run into is when you do this type of configuration, if you are dealing with an FTD from the outside world, this is really where it's going to bite you in the butt. And let me give you another panel here. So let's say, same situation, data center, one, FMC2. And we'll just say this is VXLAN, right? This is NP, BGP, VXLAN. So you're stretching L2 between the two here, right? And then what ends up happening, let's say you had an FTD in the outside world and you were doing the management interface, the management data interface. So you say, hey, I need you to establish a connection. Now there's probably going to be a firewall here just for, that's doing some type of NAT for these FMCs. Let's say one here in this data center, and then we'll do another one here in this data center with NAT. All right. Now, based on the FTD on the outside world, when you configure the manager, you're either going to do the FQDN or you're going to do the IP address, which is NATed to this. So either way. Problem with this, though, is when it reaches out to here for the FQDN or IP address, /IP, when the primary FTD reaches back out with the SF tunnel, it will give the internal IP address of the secondary FMC. So what ends up happening is you will get a public IP address for this one, but then you will get a private IP address for this one. And the problem with this is private IP addresses are not routable. So you cannot do this without running into a problem where it can't find the secondary tunnel. It can't find the FMC for the secondary, and then you run into a out of sync issue. You get this error all the time on the primary FMC because, yeah, it's out of sync because I didn't establish a tunnel with the primary FMC. So I gave you the problem. So what's the solution? So the solution to this is you have to edit the manager on each FTD you do this with, right? So you have to do, I believe it is, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's manager, edit, and then you have to get the specific, I think it's a UUID. So the UUID of the second manager, let me put it in brackets so it's not, that's not the command UUID. It's just, you got to get the UUID and then change the IP address. I change the IP address to the NATed IP address of the secondary. And then what that will do is actually help you establish the second tunnel to the secondary FMC, and then the out of sync error message should go away. The other way of doing this or getting rid of this is using CDO. So CDO is in the cloud, and you can avoid all of this primary data center stuff like that by going to CDO and then managing everything through CDO. or have someone that's like a managed service provider like myself, I can hook you into my CDO with co-managed services. Obviously, you're gonna have access to this as well, but then you can eliminate all of this. Oh, I got to worry about NAT. I got to worry about syncing. I got to worry about upgrading these things in a specific order, stuff like that. That's the real benefit of using something like CDO. You avoid pretty much all of this is avoided by going to CDO. Now, there is a certain process to do it. If you already have the other design in place, there's two ways you can do it. You can migrate them slowly off of the FMC, but you need to be on at least version, I think 7.2 to do that. If you're on 6X code, good luck. You need to upgrade this to the latest version, and then you can migrate everybody to CDO and avoid all of these problems. So that was a brief overview about FMC or SMC HA, what it's used for, where you should use it for, some of the problems that come with the HA. I gave you two of them, which was, backup restores or doing upgrades in a certain order of operation. And then this whole out of sync issue when you have FTDs on the outside world going through NAT to get to the FMC. Again, this is Don from Padlock Technologies, owner and principal. If you need help on your next network infrastructure project, or you're trying to implement some kind of design like this, or you're looking for somebody to kind of do a co-managed service where we give you continuity by, hey, working with your team and saying, hey, we'll set this all up. You guys, we don't want your job. You do what you keep doing. And then you come to us for, level 3 advisory services, stuff like that. And we're also your security blanket. And this is where continuity comes in of, hey, if someone goes on vacation, you don't have to worry about, hey, this was the silo guy who only knew this piece of equipment. And now we're kind of, we're a little antsy that that person went on vacation. Or worst case scenario, the person that knew everything about that technology, the black box person, they went and got a better opportunity. So now you got to try to find somebody that was just as good as that person, and you have to ramp them up super fast, and hopefully they work out and they don't run away from the firestorm that you're throwing them into. Hopefully this video was informative. There will be a link for a discovery call. If you need help for anything like this, again, this is a discovery call. It is not a sales call. I don't know anything about your network. So when we talk, I am not pitching you on anything because I can't. I don't know where you are, so I need to find that out first before I can tell you where you need to go. Hopefully this video was informative. Thank you and have a nice day.